Hey there, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. Um, as always, thanks to Alec Julian, who's acting as co-host and producer and engineer and recorder and moderator of the Q&A discussion. And thanks to Patricia Julian, no relation, for composing our theme music. So today we're going to talk about the Mandaic script. And we're going to, as always, use it as a window to look at some other broader issues and touch on some other scripts as well. And really, this goes back to an extraordinarily fundamental question to which we don't know the answer. And that is, why was writing created? And there is a very commonly held opinion, which is actually quite often stated as fact, that writing was created as a result of the development of city-states and the beginning of trade. And the argument is that as soon as you have commodities that need to be identified and counted and then accounted for, you need some kind of record keeping. And obviously, different cultures all over the world have used different methods for keeping records. But the argument is that this is why writing first began, and writing sort of developed out of that. And my take on that is that, of course, we can't know if that's true or not. But the fact that we think it's true, or that we think it's true, or we think it might be true, actually says a whole lot more about us than it says about, what happened in Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago. It suggests that we are only capable of thinking about writing in the ways that we think about writing now in the West, which is that we use it so habitually for so many tasks, most of them mundane, that we sort of assume that it actually has a very functional kind of purpose, and it always has. And that was the reason why it was invented. I want to talk about some other ways of thinking about this and looking at it. We've already touched on this in this series when we were talking about Balinese. And there we were talking about the notion that writing can be sacred to a people who understand it as sacred. And today we're going to go further. We're going to look at the possibility that the script itself, not the use of it, but the script itself might be sacred and even divine. And we're going to start out by talking about the Mandaeans. And as always, there's a pause here while I do share screen and I get into my PowerPoint and I start showing you some slides. And right here, we go into slideshow, play from the start. So we're going to talk about the Mandaeans. And again, I think it's really interesting and indicative that until I started working on the Endangered Alphabets project, I'd never heard of the Mandaeans, because all cultures tend to talk amongst themselves, about the things they themselves believe and are interested in. And the Mandaeans really occupy a very, very different space in these conversations. So until recently, the greatest single concentration of Mandaeans, whose lineage may well go back to Mesopotamia, ancient Babylon, that far back, was in Iraq, to the south and to the east of Baghdad. And during the Saddam Hussein era, the Mandaeans suffered various kinds of difficulty and harassment, and a number of them left for other European countries and from the United States. But things got markedly worse with the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. So one of the principal problems was that, like much US foreign policy, it tended to be an oversimplification into us and them. So in fact, what happened in the post-invasion scenario with the breakdown of law and order, the other minorities in Iraq, such as Armenians, Assyrians, Kurds, and the Mandaeans, suffered terribly from that breakdown of law and order. And in fact, the Mandaeans, whose religion forbids them to carry weapons and who are renowned for the trade of goldsmithing, and so therefore they're thought to be wealthy, suffered in particular. So here you see the Mandaean baptism ceremony at work. And what you can also see is that the Mandaean costume or clothing also makes them an easily identifiable group. So they really became targets. And nearly all of the 60,000 or so Mandaeans living in Iraq either were killed or fled. And of course, when a culture leaves its homeland and sort of tries to make do in other countries, then there is this question, do we have a critical mass to continue our language and our traditions? Are our children going to take over where we now find ourselves? And it becomes an increasingly difficult struggle to maintain that cultural cohesion. And this is particularly grim and sad in terms of the Mandaeans, not only because, like everybody, they are a remarkable and interesting people in their own right, but because of the identity and the nature of the Mandaean culture and the Mandaean script. So this is a slide of the carving, which actually you'll see behind me here. So the really interesting thing here is that the Mandaeans consider that their script, which may well have developed from Aramaic, which was the sort of scripta franca of the Middle East 2,000 plus years ago, that their script is as sacred as their literature, right? So we're not just talking about sacred books, we're talking about a sacred alphabet. Not only do they see their script as being sacred, they believe it to be such an exceptional gift and such a remarkable thing that it can't have been invented by humans. It must be divine and it must have been given to them. And in fact, as I've said before on this series, there are a number of cultures that have writing creation narratives or mythologies. And there are some that have writing creation and loss narrative and mythologies. And in their own narrative about writing, the divine creator himself, known as the Light King, he sees writing for the first time and is so impressed and astonished that he says, "Who created these letters? I did not. Therefore, there must be one mightier than I." In other words, the creation of writing is actually more astonishing and more divine than the creation of the world. So this is the Mandaean view of writing, which is rich and utterly astonishing. Because the Mandaeans see writing and their script as being so important and so divinely created, it has barely changed at all in terms of how it's used, in terms of its look, for 2,000 years. That is actually remarkably astonishing, because if any of you have seen manuscripts that go back to, say, Shakespeare's time or even to Chaucer's time, so that's only 600 years, they're almost impossible for us to read. Our writing has changed so much in that time in terms of its look and its influences. And the Mandaean script is so important and so spiritually significant that it has that quality of being conserved and preserved as is. So the next thing is I want to tell you about the alphabet, because the Mandaean alphabet is surely the most remarkable alphabet conceptually in the world. So in Mandaic, each individual letter has its own mystical meaning, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. And moreover, the alphabet consists of Mandaean versions of 22 separate letters that have function. In other words, they represent a sound. But then it adds on another 2 letters to make the total up to 24. In other words, the number of hours from sunset to sunset, and therefore a mystical number. And a number that therefore, in a sense, is circular. It rotates with the earth. One of the added letters is a ligature of 2 characters, which is something like an ampersand in English. But the final letter is simply the first letter repeated. And so it's not a linear alphabet. As I say, it's a circular alphabet, which is such a profound and extraordinary notion that I first heard about this 10 years ago, and I'm still astonished at the way in which it embeds writing in creation itself. It becomes kind of a mandala of an alphabet. 1,012 questions tells us that each letter of the alphabet emanated from the last, starting with this circular A, which is the wellspring from all the letters emerge, and then the letter B and the letter B to the letter C, and they're all emerging, sorry, the letter G, they're all emerging from their predecessors. And as they emerge, each stands up and praises its predecessor until they form a new kind of structure, a wall spreading out to the left and the right from the middle letter, the letter L, because the letter L is the builder's clay, or lebnya, that holds the left wing and the right wing of the wall together. Okay, so this is just getting remarkable here. But when you have a wall that is linear, it's not very stable. Excuse me, while I choked to death here. And so the letters realized that in order to be stable, they had to hold hands. They had to clasp hands together to form a circle. And that way they form a solid foundation. So A becomes both the wellspring from which all the other letters spring, and then also the crown on top of their heads. And only then did it become possible to name all things and speak every mystery, because language is not possible. And this is a quote, although obviously a translation quote. Language is not possible without this indivisible republic of letters. That's just such an extraordinary phrase and such an extraordinary notion, but it becomes even more extraordinary because in being the means by which enlightenment is spread. So the Mandaeans are Gnostic. The word manda means knowledge, just as in Greek the word gnosis means knowledge. And the word knowledge doesn't mean just like knowledge of the world, like R.I.P. Alec Trebek, Jeopardy. It means knowledge of the divine. And so in the Mandaean view of writing, if writing is able to transmit divinity, transmit enlightenment, then it is in itself divine. It's not merely a truck through which or on which enlightenment is delivered. And so the act of writing takes on an invisible, it begins with an invisible, insubstantial thought, and then it makes it visible to all, and in a sense, habitable. So this is all pretty extraordinary stuff. And if you have been watching any of my talks up until now, you'll know that I don't take these, this is the Mandaean indivisible republic of letters, by the way. I don't take these things as superstitions. I take them as explanations, cultural explanations of ideas that we ourselves don't think about, or have stopped thinking about, or have lost the ability to think about. And so that's what today's talk is going to be about, which is other ways of thinking about writing, other ways of thinking about alphabets. So this is the Cham letter E. So the Cham people originally inhabited the kingdom of Champa in what would now be central Vietnam. And as I've talked about in other talks, they were sort of infringed upon and ultimately overrun by the Emperor of Vietnam. They were abused in all kinds of grim ways. And they are now scattered throughout southern Vietnam and over the border into Cambodia, and then other areas of diaspora like Malaysia and Australia. So the Cham people believe that writing is so central to their relationship with the spirit world that if somebody dies without having to learn how to read and write, then the priest sits beside the corpse in the period between death and cremation and teaches the letters to the corpse. And only then will that soul be to the afterlife. So that is a pretty astonishing notion. Here's a different way of looking at the relationship between writing and spirit. So this is a syllable from the Siddham script. And the Siddham letters are also described as seed syllables. So in Buddhism, and obviously you can see that the letter is rising from the double lotus here. In Buddhism, there is this really sophisticated notion of what is the spiritual power of an idea, and also how does an idea grow. And the idea of a seed syllable is that at any given time, we may be told something, or we may hear something that whose significance we do not yet understand. And over time, it kind of grows in us like a seed until we finally understand, oh, wait a minute. And it's like, yes, we understand. In that sense, we become enlightened. And so therefore, each syllable has this kind of seed quality of enlightenment. So much so that there are meditations in Shingon Buddhism, which uses the Siddham script, which meditate on a specific syllable and its meaning. And those meditations are used for healing purposes, not just for kind of like calming the mind, but actually for spiritual and physical healing as a result of that. So again, we're moving really a long way away from our notion, which is that a letter is simply a symbol that stands for a sound. This is a letter from the Sora Sompeng alphabet. So the Sora people live in eastern India. And there is a particular subgroup within the Sora people who are known And when I saw this phrase, I was like, what? As the alphabet worshippers. So the Sompeng script, of which you see a letter here, is a revealed alphabet. There are a number of revealed scripts around the world. In other words, scripts that came to somebody in a vision or a dream. And in this particular culture, which is an animist culture, there are a number of, oh, I can't believe this, sonam. Okay, I may have got this word wrong. My memory is suddenly failing me. There are a number of sort of animating spirits in the environment around the Sora people. And this particular dream or vision was that each of these spirits, which are very powerful, came to the dreamer and revealed themselves as a symbol which would be the first letter of that spirit's name. And so what we have here is not simply a usable alphabet for communication, it's an alphabet that offers access to the spirit world. And for the Sora people, this is particularly important because especially this particular subgroup of Sora speak to their dead. They speak to them all the time, or they used to. I guess this practice is now in decline. But anybody who was going to make a decision or anybody who was in doubt or whatever would hold an out loud conversation with their dead relatives and ancestors as just a part of their everyday negotiation with life. And so therefore, an alphabet, which is a visible representation of that conversation with the spirit world, then becomes something that is, again, way more than just letters. And in fact, the way that the alphabet is kept alive is by performance and by music and dance and chanting. And so the thing that we know as the Sesame Street alphabet song, for them is a transcendent experience that enables them to open the door. And I think this is really sort of an extraordinary notion and one that we should all be sort of meditating on. So we're coming back now full circle to Mandaic. This is a piece of, what would you describe it? This is a piece of typography because it was actually created by a typographer. It's a piece of graphic design, was created by a graphic designer. It is, in a sense, also a meditation. Whether you would call it a prayer or not, I'm honestly not sure. Down in the bottom left, you'll see the name of the creator, which is Adwan Al-Sabti, who is a Mandaean graphic designer living in the Netherlands. And this is, I would have to say, one of the most profound statements that I've ever heard, and I'm still not sure I understand it. Because what it does is to say, if the word is divine, and this really harks back to, the belief in that you see in John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the word. Okay, so that's equating the word with God in many ways. So again, it's also saying the word is divine, but we've sort of lost that sense of the meaning of the word. So if the word is divine, and if people are individually and collectively capable of enlightenment and access to the divine, then what it means is that we are all words. It's just that the word words means something different to what we're used to. So the translation into really poor, dull, ordinary English of this piece of design is I am a word from words. I came for the name of life. Okay, I'll repeat that because you might want to write it down. It's just an extraordinary notion. I am a word from words, which I take to mean in ordinary English, by being a person, I am also a fragment of the divine. And I have come from words and I am a word. I am a divine spark as part of the divine incandescence, if you like. I came for the name of life, which of course speaks to why we are created, why we're here, what we're supposed to do. So I am a word from words. I came for the name of life. You hear that and you will never look at a grocery list the same way again. Okay, so I am gonna stop my cogitating and talking and screen sharing here and get out of this. And in a second, I'm gonna pass it over to Alec to do the moderation of conversation and chat and all this kind of stuff. Before I do, I would say that I'm hoping that tomorrow we launch our Kickstarter campaign to raise money to create one game definitely and possibly several, and do a variety of other activities to support the protection, preservation, and promotion of the Mongolian alphabet, which is currently under major threat. And you've probably seen the news. I hope that you will support that campaign. I hope you'll tell other people about that campaign. I hope you'll carry on telling other people about it for the 30 days that it runs, because we need your help. We need your help. And the Mongolian people, like every embattled minority, needs your help. That's what the Endangered Alphabets Project is all about. Okay, Alec, I am going to turn it over to you. And people who are here, I would love to hear your comments, your questions, and observations, any of the above.
Well, we have one question about what you were just talking about, asking if this means we'd be an image of divinity, I guess maybe as opposed to a part of divinity. I'm not sure. Maybe the person who wrote that would like to chime in some more.
Yeah, who asked that question?
I asked that question, and you had indicated that the word is divine and therefore our name and the image. And so I was indicating, would that mean that we are an image of divinity?
As I understand it, especially if you think about it in the kind of Christian terms that I was brought up in, the notion of an image of God indicates a separation between the two. And as I understand it, and I'm not a Mandaean, and I would gladly be put right by this, there is no separation. And so when we say, I am a word from words, it's as if there is a continuity between the individual and the divine. So much so that the word individual is probably misleading, just as the word image may be misleading. So the Christian notion, God made man in his image, apart from being sexist, is it implies a separation, divine, clay. And as I understand it, the Mandaeans do not see a distinction between the two. But I'm totally open to being told that I'm wrong by anybody who knows more about Mandaean mysticism than I do. Go for it. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, and then I was just thinking about that because in the Navajo culture, they say that with the holy deities and similar, that they made man, but that everyone is the grandchildren of the holy people. And so I was wondering if there was a connection like that with what you are saying as well.
So, first of all, I love the idea of any religion that sees a like a familial connection between people and the divine, as opposed to identifying people as being like good and evil and stuff like that. Secondly, what interests me here is the use of the word words. And the Mandaeans have obviously thought about this in a way that most cultures don't, or possibly have stopped doing or have forgotten doing. So in other words, if there is this intimate relationship between people and the divine, what is the role of words? What is the role of this indivisible republic of letters? What is the role of the written word in all of this? And that, as far as I know, and I'm not a specialist in world religions, that could be unique. I've certainly never heard of it elsewhere. But as I say, I could be wrong. Other questions?
We have a verbiage request.
What's that?
I don't know.
Just watching too many movies about Charlie Chan recently, maybe.
What are you talking about, Olish?
Whatever, it doesn't matter. What I wanted to talk about is about the divinity in the letters.
Yes, good.
Kabbalah.
So I know very little about the Kabbalah. Tell me more.
So it's a bit similar, and it's not only in Jewish Kabbalah where you've got three things intertwined, actually. First is letters as letters, and then letters as numbers, and letters as symbols of the divine, very much as in what you say. And what is funny, it's have you ever heard about runes?
Yes.
And funny to mention it in the next sentence, our good Nazi friends made runes, and they actually ran away with the occult understanding of runes, and it is coming back again. And it is maybe, perhaps not as it was in the original runic times when they were using them for Scandinavian languages. But then again, every rune has or runa, whatever you call them, has a particular meaning, particular divine consequences as well. So Mandaic is not the only one that has this kind of understanding, and runes right now are functioning only in that way.
Right.
And it brings to mind another thing which is used also for communication with divine, or with the other word. First one is tarot,
Mm-hmm.
and second, you kill me, Ouija board.
Actually, I thought you were going to talk about the various scripts from Central and Eastern Asia, such as the Sushaba and the Dongas.
Oh yes, those are. It's just such a topic that I'm afraid to step on it.
Yes, it's
yeah, because you've got even in Chinese, you've got this the value of the name. And in the old traditions, you couldn't even destroy a piece of paper with writing on it without burning.
Right, and we saw that in the Balinese talk as well. Yes,
Yeah.
Yes. What I think makes the Mandaeans so different, because obviously there are a lot of cultures which regard writing as sacred or spiritually charged, is that they have actually identified the word, and they obviously are looking at that in this way, in which, again, I wish I knew more about the history of religious language, because I don't know what in the beginning was the word. I don't know what exactly that word meant, logos, right? I don't know exactly.
We have such even the term Tao that we use for Taoism, in one of the meanings in Chinese, classical Chinese, means actually to speak.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Rarely mentioned.
Yeah.
And the word is so confusing. We actually had a great discussion with other Chinese linguists on what is actually a word, Because in Chinese, you've got a character. It is not a word, it's just half a word. It's a morpheme.
Yep.
It's very confusing what is a word.
Yep. Totally
Because
agree.
we have this idea of the word and it's funny that all the abjads have a very clear idea of the word. Why? Because they have
Yep.
letters for the beginning and the end of the word.
Yep. Very
Why?
true.
In our Latin script or Latin derived scripts, we invented space pretty late. So the word itself, if you listen to the speech, if you ever worked as an anthropologist, you know it's not separated in any way.
Right. And there are, for example, a number of the Indonesian scripts have only started using spaces between words extremely recently. Okay, I feel as if I'm dominating the conversation here. Who else wants to jump in?
We have a couple of really interesting questions.
Okay, go for it.
One is whether or not any of these scripts have been typeset or computerized, and whether or not that interferes with the divine status of them.
That is really interesting, and I would have to, obviously they have, because Ardoan Al-Sabti has actually designed fonts for Mandaean, and right now one of his fonts is actually about to be used for a major publication of a Mandaean spiritual text. On the other hand, if you think about the Arabic script Nastaliq, there was a tradition up until extremely recently that said that script, in its handwritten form, was the only true representation of the divine word. So I would love to hear from theologians about whether the intervention of mechanical process does in fact debase the contact between the human and the divine. Okay, what's the other really interesting question you have?
I guess I should unmute myself.
See, that's what we're talking about, the interference between the human and the divine, just there, right there.
There's an interesting comment on that. Someone says that Arabic typography had a rough start because early attempts were considered undignified for the setting of the Quran.
Yeah, absolutely true. In fact, there was, until quite recently, there were newspapers in the Muslim areas of Indonesia where the headlines, which needed to be in Nastaliq, were actually handwritten. And I believe in other areas, the entire newspaper was handwritten.
A question here. Have the Mandaeans been able to reconstitute congregations and communities in the diaspora?
The answer is yes. I believe there's a solid community in Worcester, Massachusetts, for example. And I believe in the Netherlands, I believe in Sweden. You never know whether a critical mass is going to be a critical mass in perpetuity or for the time being. So they just have my best wishes. I can't answer that any more definitively than that.
Someone's asking if we can type in the name of that font designer that you were just talking about.
Yes, I can type it in right now, or I can actually give dictation. So it's Ardwan, Ardwan, Al-Sabti, Alsabti.
I missed that because it autocorrected the first name to Adrian.
So what we'll do is we'll put this out. If you can just type that in and it doesn't autocorrect, then that'll be in the chat, and we'll send the chat out with the post Zoom email that we always send out.
Someone typed it in, so.
Okay, great.
Tim, what you were saying reminded me of something that's not directly connected, but it was so humorous I couldn't forget it once you mentioned it. As you know, undoubtedly, the teaching of cursive writing is dropping off for younger students rapidly, in English especially. And I heard someone say recently that it was getting to the point where soon cursive writing would be like a code that older people would be able to use because younger people now so often can't read it at all. There was some incident in a store or something where my dad or someone heard a younger person saying that a note handed to them written in cursive, she couldn't read it at all, so it's turning into a code. It's gaining its own rather esoteric status rapidly.
Yes, and I have to say, when I go out and give talks and exhibitions and this kind of stuff, not only is that question the most frequently asked question, is cursive an endangered alphabet? But I don't know that I've ever given a talk in public where that question has not come up. And that is so much the case that I wrote a blog post about it. So if you go to endangeredalphabets.com and you click on the blog link and you scroll down a little way, because I did this maybe a year ago, you'll actually find my thoughts on the subject, because my thoughts on the subject are actually quite complicated. And I decided I needed to put them down, if only because everybody is asking that question. Okay, let's take 2 more questions.
All right. Could you please go over the Sura people and the connection of word to the spirit world?
Oh, yes. So this was the Sora Sompang. So yes, no, I'm not going to screen share. So they, the Sora are, like many people, especially in India, they are devotees of a number of different religions. It's an area that has been Hindu. It's been quite heavily Christianized in certain areas. And one particular group in one fairly small area has a set of animist beliefs, and their particular alphabet is called Sora Sompeng. So they are Sora people who use the Sora Sompeng alphabet. And they're, as I say, each letter in the alphabet is not only the initial letter, but also in a sense, a summoning device to reach the spirit world, to reach that particular deity in their area. So for example, you know, one of these, as I say, I believe they're called sonam. One might be, for example, a mountain, or one might be a lizard. You know how this, you know, the relationship with the environment and the spirit world is. You know, they one is an embodiment of the other. I don't know what all of the sonam, if that is in fact the word, actually are. But yeah, that's exactly how they see their alphabet. There's also a similar kind of thing, different in some ways, in Cuba, that's called firmas, which means signatures. And this is a set of beliefs brought over on the slave ships from West Africa. And they create these extraordinary sort of cosmograms, which are not alphabetical, but they are symbols which they will, for example, put on a door. And each of those symbols is in fact a portal to the spirit world, and sort of an invitation for the passage of spirit back and forth between what we think of as the material world and the spirit world. So the notion of writing as a stargate, if you like, it does turn up in a number of places. Okay, let's take one more question.
Do you happen to know anything about the status of the Iranian Mandaean community?
Yeah, as far as I understand, oh, the Iranian Mandaean community. No, I don't. Ardwan Al-Sabti could not be with us to watch this, but I'm going to send him the link. So I'm hoping that he may be able to let us know the answers to some of these questions. when he sees the recording. All right. I need to, once again, it always happens. I get to the end of these and I'm parched and I need tea. You know, it's obviously that connection with the great British spirit world of the hot drink. As always, thanks to everybody for coming along and watching and joining in and asking interesting questions. I will send all of you an email with the link to the recording of this talk, and also a link to the next talk. I hope you all stay well. I hope you all get good governance in the future. And I hope to see you all again. Bye.